And I'm going to get that started right now. All right, well, welcome and thank you. This is the third community of practice for the Diversity, Equity, Inclusion, and Justice Community of Practice Group. It's a joint effort of the North American Conservation Initiative and the Diversity Joint Venture. So the objectives of the community of practice are to provide a forum for organizations to learn from each other, to create a space that encourages diverse participation and different voices within NABCI, and to provide additional resources to help partners expand diversity and partnership opportunities. So, if you've attended previous sessions, this was Judith Scarl's brainchild. She and a steering committee, including Elsa Hobbold and Veronica Reed, who are here today, as well as Kate London and Viviana Ruiz Gutierrez, who could not make it today. They launched this effort. Jude, as you may know, has left NABCI. She's just started with the AOS, American Ornithological Society. And she asked me to step up to lead this. And so I'm, very happy to be here and specifically to introduce the two speakers we have today. And so today our session is focusing on what can I do? So as we all know, organizations and individuals can be at different places when it comes to diversity work. Some organizations are incorporating diversity, equity, inclusion, and justice throughout their organizations, and some individuals are working from the ground up to encourage their organizations to recognize and incorporate diversity practices. Today, we're going to focus on challenging assumptions about how diversity, equity, inclusion, and justice work can happen, and help participants think about the initial steps that they can take within their organization, with or without organizational support. So we have two fantastic speakers. Chris Kennedy is going to kick things off, and then Danielle Ross-Winslow is going to be speaking later. We're also going to have two breakout groups, one after each speaker. And to change things up a little bit from previous community of practice sessions, we're going to assign you to breakout groups that you will meet with in both sessions. You can, begin to, bond through these sessions. All right, so let me get started by introducing Chris Kennedy. Chris Kennedy has worked with the Missouri Department of Conservation for over 25 years. He started out assisting and educating private landowners and the general public about management of aquatic resources. He then moved up to the Fisheries Regional Supervisor position, where he provided coordination and oversight of species and habitat conservation management for southeastern Missouri. And throughout, his commitment to diversity, equity, and inclusion shone through. And today, Chris is assistant to the Director on Inclusion and Diversity, where he can further advance DEIJ and conservation across the state. I also hear he has some amazing stories about GAR. So Chris, thank you, and take it away.
Thank you, Nicole. I hope everybody's doing very well on this hump day. I'm glad to be speaking to you from Columbia, Missouri. And I wanted this presentation to really focus in on what you can do. How many of you are a little tired of going to these types of meetings and we hear the problems, but steps on how to move forward, how to move the needle are somewhat lacking in a lot of arenas. So I hope that this presentation gives you some logical steps that you can take individually and within your organization to make the changes that we need. I'll say it throughout this presentation. We typically, as humans, we're fixers, and we love to jump to solutions. And this even plagues a lot of us in our scientific community. But we truly need a process. And if I don't give you a process for which you can move forward with yourself individually and with your organization, please chat out, stop me, let me know, because that's truly my goal, is to give you that process. Before I get too far in any presentation, let me make sure my slides will change here. Okay, so before I get too far into any of my presentations about inclusion and diversity, I always like to emphasize the why. People have to know, why is this important? Why is this important to my agency? Why is this important to me? And the reality is within our organizations, we get better business performance, higher innovation, increased creativity, better decision-making. Our society is calling out for it and demanding it. Hopefully by the end of this presentation, and I would assume that you already all feel like it's the right thing to do. Hopefully by the end, if you don't, you will feel like it's the right thing to do. And ultimately, this is about our branding. You know, what is our agency brand for the public? And we have to look at that across the demographics. Many people don't like the categories that we see today. I mean, we've almost got a category for everything, and it's necessary to do that to obtain good measures, but we have to resist the temptation to think that way. And our reputations, our brands are different across these different demographics. And so it's important that we really look at inclusion and diversity across all these demographics, but also, I just want to remind you that as you move forward, for me, the goal is to there not be a need for a category. I'll be glad when the day comes when I don't have to be recognized as a Black American, but just be an American. Um, and it'll be nice to see. I don't know if I'll see it in my lifetime, but I certainly would be glad to be not categorized. If you, as Nicole said, I'm a fish biologist, and I very rarely do any presentation without putting a fish in it somewhere. So here's your fish of the day, an awesome fish. A lot of people don't like it because of the way it looks, but I spent a lot of my career working on that particular species. And anyway, that's your fish of the day. All right, what can we do as we go through this presentation? I'm gonna go through it really quickly, or try to, because I usually try to fit all of this information into about an hour. And so it's a challenge to get it done within 15 minutes, but I hope I succeed. At the end of the presentation, I hope that we've covered these steps to success. The first is discuss. In our communities, in our society, many of us, the majority of us, are not used to talking about these types of topics. And so we've got to create room to have these discussions. Before we can get anywhere, we have to discuss. And that means we have to create room for each other, because when I'm saying discuss, I mean creating the opportunity for safe places. And I keep saying room, but we have to give each other room. Some of us are very close to these topics, and they can be emotionally charging. For those individuals that are feeling that way, you have to give them room. Many of us struggle with what language to use. They don't want to say the wrong word, don't want to insult anybody. Totally understandable. But in order to have the safe place for the discussion, we've got to create room for all sides. Consciously develop the ability to be empathetic. And I say consciously with emphasis, because it does not come naturally. It's not a natural tendency. We have to truly work at it. We have to have a collective desire. I can't do it alone. You can't do it alone. The only way we will see change in our organizations, within our society, is if we build critical mass, which builds to a collective desire to achieve something. We cannot be afraid to measure. Measuring where we are, where we're going, how are we trending. It's very important. We've got to assess those barriers, then develop strategies, apply collective action and accountability, research, and then adapt. So as I think about, the discussion and developing empathy in particular, one of the ways that I found to do that, I ran across this about 2 years ago, and I began using the Thomas Hart Benton murals to really begin that discussion. Within my state, I've talked to agency directors across state government, I've presented information to the governor, and I utilize these murals to really open up the discussion, and to really emphasize how hard it is to see the world in an empathetic way, and how that takes conscious effort. And it really, ran true to me when I was in the Leadership Academy course. This was a 7-month course that focused on leadership development and facilitation. And we were all in the Capitol and we were reviewing these murals. And there was a visually impaired friend of mine who was standing next to me, and he heard everybody, it was 30 of us, he heard everybody talking about the murals and what they were seeing. And he said, Chris, tell me what you're seeing. Tell me what's going on. And I started telling him what I saw in the mural. And at the same time, I'm ear hustling. So I'm listening to what other people are saying, what they see in the mural. And I noticed it's all different things. And what we see, even when we look at murals, is really based on how we view the world or how we've experienced the world. Um, that's at the moment when it really came clear. And so I started using these murals to really uncover that in more detail, and by working with participants in my workshop to really reveal what do they see, what part of the mural sticks out the most to them. And it rings true every time I do this exercise. Now, I don't have time to do it today, but after talking to the governor of Missouri about it, he said after hearing the interpretations of the murals, he said he walked by the murals every day, and there are things that we brought out that he has never seen. And so this was at a time when we were very polarized as a society. And to me, it rang true. This is one of the reasons we're so polarized, because we neglect or we don't think about old Albert Einstein's, statement. The world as we see it is only the world as we see it. Others may see it differently. And so I'll use these murals to start that discussion and to develop, that empathetic view of one another. And it's important as you go through history that you don't stay here. This is not a destination. This is something that you touch on and you move quickly, because you don't want to paralyze your staff, your organization with the history and things that they can't do anything about. We want to keep them focused. We touch it just to develop and discuss, but we quickly move forward, and how can we move the needle? And so I figured I would start individually. Remember, it's got to take individual intentional effort. You've got to ask yourself, how can you personally move the needle? If you're a leader or if you're a supervisor, or it really doesn't matter what your level is, whether you're from the bottom of your agency starting the grassroots, or you're at the top of the agency. Do you have your elevator speech ready? Are you ready to talk to your organization about inclusion and diversity and equity? Are you ready to talk about it when it comes up at family reunions, or when you hear things that you know are wrong? Do you resist the temptation or do you resist speaking up to talk about inclusion and diversity? And so you have to have your elevator speech ready. And the reality is, if you don't verbally support it, why should anyone else? And we've got to look at it from different perspectives. The solutions for all of these different categories of people that we attempt to measure and think about, they're the same. It's how are we inclusive with one another? We've struggled with inclusivity since the founding of our nation. We still struggle today. It's nothing new. But we've either justice is for everybody or it's for none. And so we have to be prepared to verbally support it and speak up on it, even when it takes a tremendous amount of courage to do so. We have to collectively want to change. To start with that, we first have to admit that we do have a problem. And then we have to ask ourselves individually and our organizations, where are we on this? Are we comfortable being where we are, or do we want change? Once again, we've got to start talking about the problem to resolve it. It will not go away by itself. Once we understand the why, we can then work on the what. And that's something that should ring true to all the scientists in the room. That's just a basic philosophy that you utilize when you embark on scientific research. Do we have the collective desire? When I took my job with this new position that I'm in, I remember talking to my director, and I had to share with her a little bit of my vulnerability. I can't do it. I can't do it alone. I'm only one man. I'm only one part of an organization. We have, we've got to assess, do we have that collective desire? Which means it's got to come from every aspect of the agency. Equity, diversity, and inclusion are not in one position. It's not in one part of the agency. It's got to spread itself through the entire agency, committee, or organization. Recognize that we like preaching to the choir, don't we? We love it when we speak, and it's kind of hurting me now because I can't see any of your faces and I don't know how you respond, but we love to speak, and we look out in the crowd and everybody's nodding their head. Yep, we agree. But we've got to be willing to talk about these issues in areas where people may not agree or where we may have disagreement. We have to explore that and embark on that. And once again, it's got to take, I can't say it enough, collective, intentional effort. Before you get started, you know, I got the natural resources in my heart, and they will never go away. I'm happy to say. And anytime before we start managing a resource, what do? We measure it. It's the same thing with this. And ultimately, for inclusion, diversity, and equity, what you measure gets managed. And so we've got to start there. And these can't just be measures, they've got to be quantifiable measures. And then you utilize these measures to really drive your vision and to help develop that vision and develop what true success looks like. Because when you talk about inclusion and diversity, I'm finding that everybody has a different interpretation of what success is. Well, in any organization, in order to achieve inclusion and diversity, we've got to get on one accord. What does a checker flag look like? What does a checker flag look like? What does it mean to score a touchdown? We've got to have some ability to interpret that. It takes collective effort and accountability. It can't just, once again, exist in one portion of your organization. It takes a collective effort. And we've got to be prepared to hold our staff, our organizations, ourselves accountable, you know, to that vision. And then you don't just want to measure what is going on internally, look externally as well. And you utilize this data to, help really demonstrate whether you're meeting your goals or how is your agency trending. And so, like for my agency, we're going through a process where we're looking at what does our staff demographics look like. But it's not, our measures don't just relate to staff demographics. How inclusive are we? We created surveys to really help us understand how inclusive our agency actually is, not just across race or across gender, but do we operate well across disciplines, which from my perspective has been an issue for many conservation agencies. And we talk about ecosystem management, but we very rarely cooperate across our agency or our respective disciplines. Where do our services go? Who receives our services? We provide a lot of programs. Who receives those programs? We have a lot of cost share programs for landowners. Who receives that funding? It's important to measure because as we talk about equity, we have to know where we are. And not only where we are if you're the majority, but where are we as it pertains to these other demographics within society? Never start with solutions. This is a major problem that I'm seeing within a lot of our initiatives. We have to recognize that most of the times when we look at our barriers or our problems, we're typically only looking at what's on the surface. A good way to view it is we utilize the iceberg model a lot because it forces us to really dig down beneath the surface and look at, what's been happening. What are the common forces? How do processes or organizations impact inclusion and diversity? What type of thinking allows for the lack of inclusion and diversity or allows it to persist in our cultures? Keep in mind, there are no silver bullet solutions. The whole point and the only way we get to solutions is by getting to the root of, or the root cause of our mindsets. Why do we think the way we do? Don't be afraid to step outside of your arena and consult subject matter experts. Who's doing it best in government? Who's doing it best in industry? And then we research, which we all do well. But keep in mind, we're not the first to do this. The United States and most state organizations have been recruiting diverse communities since the Civil War. So we're not the first, and I would venture to say that in all of that time, we've stumbled on successes. We've just struggled at being consistent with those successes. And so we've got to research and really take a good look back at some of the initiatives that have taken place. Were they successful? Were they not? What made them successful? When I think about some of the exercises that we're doing in our agencies, and when I think about all the steps that I just mentioned, I would imagine some of you are thinking, wow, this is going to take a long time. And so I wanted to give you an example of what this actually looks like, what this process looks like, and help you understand that it doesn't take a lot of time. And so remember, we always operate within our sphere of influence. And in this instance, we were talking about within our agency, I was talking to protection staff. And we started out with a few initial strategies. We knew we wanted to better assess agents' ability to be inclusive. And so when we started interviewing these agents, we adopted some questions to assess that. Once we did that, we conducted our interviews. We even diversified the interview panel. I was one of the individuals on that panel. And we went through 40 applicants to be an agent. And we quickly recognized that we had good numbers of females that applied. We had good numbers of males and Black males. And when it all shook out and we chose our 16 agents, many of our minority groups had really struggled to compete for these positions. And these were really good these are really good applicants. There was nothing wrong with them. If you had put them in a lesser group or a group that wasn't as prepared, these are individuals that would probably shake out on top. And so none of us wanted to talk about how do we reduce the qualifications. I mean, I was talking with agency or protection or leadership, and none of us wanted to reduce our qualifications. So then we started talking about, well, how do we level the playing field? Because many of our white male agents or applicants that applied for it, they've been wanting to be agents since they were 3 and 5 years old. And I don't care who you are, when you're competing against somebody like that, they are hard to beat. And so we allowed that conversation to evolve into, how do we level the playing field? What are some things that we can do to take advantage of the diversity and ensure that they're capable of competing for these positions? And these are some of the things that we developed just within the last 7 months. We added additional internships for those applicants that we identified in hopes of preparing them for the next agent trainee or the next time we interviewed agents for our protection program. We started a mentoring program. We created a women's leadership panel. Our agency leadership, our protection leadership, went out and began to have conversations with our minorities and our female officers to get a better perception of what their view of our work culture is. I mentioned our diverse interview panel and questions. We created regional accountability, and we did that through leadership. This is why it's so important to approach it from the top down. And I've done it both ways, and you can have massive impact with grassroots initiatives and starting from the bottom up, but you really make great strides when the leadership is also pushing for and driving that accountability. We created specific inclusion and diversity training for just our agents, where we talked about some of the issues that law enforcement have with their branding right now in society. We talked about some of the historical reasons that branding is has a negative connotation to it. What does community policing mean? We created partnerships with Lincoln University, which is a historically Black college in the state of Missouri. In fact, it was one of the first in the nation. We also expanded our degree requirements. Historically, we said that agents, had to be in a criminal justice, or we had very small degree paths that they could be an agent with, and we expanded that out to include other degrees. And what we ended up with on this current group, this new group that we hired, they weren't necessarily racially diverse, but they are really very inclusive people. And I know that they have the capability to go and deliver conservation services anywhere to any community within the state of Missouri. And I'm also have no doubt that in the future, when I'm saying in the future, I'm thinking the next 12 months, we will have measurable change, especially within Protection Division. That may not be true for the whole department, but I'm certain we'll see it in Protection Division just because of these efforts here. And they continually look to expand those strategies. Action, we need action. When I say action, don't get confused about it, or think about it in too complicated way and be too complicated with it. Just focus on your sphere of influence and recognize you can't do it on your own. My real goal of my job is bringing people with me. I can't do it alone, nor can you. And so it's about critical mass and having critical mass of individuals around you, those in your agency, within your staff that are committed to action, collective effort and accountability. We hope to reach a point where there's really no need for my position anymore, because we're holding each other collectively accountable. I can't emphasize more, enough how necessary it is to lead from the top down. Integrate your I&D objectives within every aspect of your committee, within your organization. Look at your internal messaging. Do you have inclusive language as you message internally and externally? I was recently given a workshop, and this was a new one on me. One of the participants said, well, Chris, I've been insulted the whole time that you've been giving your workshop. And I was like, oh man, I failed. But it really turned out into a win, because he started talking about how he had a son that was challenged. And throughout this whole workshop, I had been referring to challenged people as disabled or handicapped. And to him, that was an insult. I never thought about it in those terms. And so we have to be careful about our messaging and recognize who are we speaking to and what are we saying. And then we've got to identify strategic partnerships to really accomplish our goals. Adapt with the times. I recently went to, I guess it was about 4 years ago, I went to Washington, D.C., and I was standing at the Martin Luther King Monument. And at the bottom of his monument, he says that the arc of the moral universe is long, but it bends towards justice. Now, after reading that statement, I thought Martin Luther King came up with that statement, but that's not true. That statement was truly created by a Unitarian minister named Theodore Parker back in 1871. And what he originally said was, I do not pretend to understand the moral universe. The arc is a long one. My eye reaches but a little ways. I cannot calculate the curve and complete the figure by experience of sight. I can only divine it by consciousness. And from what I see, it bends towards justice. Now, when he first created these words, he was in 1856. He was talking about slavery here in America. And in 1958, Martin Luther King repeated these words to a nation that was still fighting for equality for all its people. Now, we cannot judge the length or the pitch of the moral arc, but is that the question anyway? I mean, the reality is, and when I think about 1871, 1958, and where we are today, I would say that these two gentlemen were right. You know, as society progresses through time, we do become more just. But is that, like I said, the question? Or is the real question, as the moral arc is formed, on what side of that arc will you be remembered? This goes back to our branding. How will our agencies be remembered? Our committees, our organizations? How will we be remembered personally? And just like, you know, we started this conversation out talking about the murals and how I utilize those murals. Well, it's being recorded, whether we like it or not. And so we have to ask ourselves, how do we want to appear in the future? So just to sum this all up for you all real quick, 4 basic steps that I would recommend, and it's got to be driven from leadership. We've got to marry inclusion and diversity and equity, the equity vision, into all of our organizational priorities. We've got to use the metrics to improve and to know where we are and to drive the vision and what it means to succeed. Then we research and we find for maximum impact. And so I'll stop there. I want to leave you with a few quotes. Diversity is a mix of inclusion. And I'm sorry, diversity is the mix. Inclusion is making the mix work. I'm seeing now close on the screen that these are M&Ms, but I think of Skittles and how good all of them, all the colors taste when I put them in my mouth. I'd also like to provide a couple quotes from Catherine Epstein in the American Purpose article. And she said, across the political spectrum, we as Americans are losing the ability to see one another in our full complex humanity. In a national orgy of intellectual incuriosity and uncritical thinking, we are reducing each other to inhuman caricatures. And this is kind of what I was thinking about when I talk about all the categories we like to place people in. I think it's once again a human tendency, one that we must resist. We are awash with critiques from the left and the right, and from the right and the left, but critiques from within an ideology or political movement are harder to find. We can't be afraid of critiquing ourselves. Thank you all for listening to me. I hope I got that done in my allotted time. And at this point, I'll entertain any questions if you have them.
Thank you so much, Chris. That was absolutely fantastic. Really enjoyed that. My quantitative heart loved hearing about measuring metrics, and it was neat to hear about the history of the Martin Luther King quote. I wasn't aware of that. So yeah, we do have time for a couple of questions. All right.
It's not good when you're silent, you all. You're supposed to talk. You're supposed to say something.
I guess you answered everything.
Hope so.
I see a couple people unmuted.
Hi, I have a quick question. I'm wondering if you have, I don't know, maybe more specific advice for encouraging the rest of your team to want to take this on. It's definitely something that we all try to talk about on a weekly basis, and it's definitely something that everyone on our staff understands and is important and wants to engage in, but we have a little bit of trouble actually really taking those action steps. And you know, like I've been coming to these calls and a couple of us have been doing similar things, but I'm wondering if you have advice for getting the rest of the staff to kind of like want to join in on conversations like this and want to take the time to do these kinds of things too, other than just a couple of us.
Absolutely. I think the first step is, who are your champions? You're not alone. The enemy just wants you to think you're alone. But I guarantee you, within your perspective circles, that there are champions. Reward them, acknowledge them, bring them to the forefront. Help help use their work to demonstrate to your other staff what you're looking for. The other part is, your leadership has got to be on board for you to do this effectively. And so as you go like through the iceberg model and you really get to the bottom or the root of what's causing our culture to be the way it is, and you build those solutions, well, those solutions should turn into actual work objectives for your staff. And then you hold, and they've got to be smart objectives. You can't have a conversation with me and hit your check mark. Well, I'm done. These have got to be smart objectives. I'm hearing a little feedback from somebody's. There you go. Thank you, Christian. But you've got to have those objectives in place so that you can ultimately hold people accountable. Be ready to speak, Lily. You've got to speak up. This not only hurts you if you don't, it hurts those coming behind you. I think about that every day. The next Black man that wants to come work for the Fish and Wildlife Service or Missouri Department of Conservation, will they have to go through the same things I went through in the 90s? Really? I mean, and this is the 90s, and I could tell you some horror stories. And so we've got to speak up. I was at a conference. Everybody, and this is after the conference is over. You all know what our conferences are like sometimes. And so there's a room full of people drinking. There's one lady in the room, she's being harassed. I know it. The room knows it, but she didn't really speak up on it. The individual that was harassing her, he ultimately didn't go through with it with her, but he harassed another young lady, a younger young lady in college, that was a student later on that night. And so when we have these opportunities, we have got to speak up. And that's on an individual level, that's at the parties, that's at our organizational meetings, that's at your family reunions when you got the family member, you all know the one that's always saying stuff off the wall that they have no business saying, and you are personally insulted by the statements that they made. You have to speak up. I know it's your family. It's difficult. I face that every day, and I must muster the courage to speak up. That's my position. Now, it's a little easier for me because I'm getting paid to speak up and have that courage, but we all ought to have enough moral capacity within inside of ourselves to be able to speak up for what is right. Remember, if it's just for everybody, not for one group or another. I hope that helps, Lily.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you. I think especially taking examples and really pointing them out to the staff is important, because I see it and I think, oh, this is great. But I think sometimes it's missed in the many emails and day-to-day work. So I think it's great advice. Thank you.
Thank you, Chris. That was fantastic. We could do one more quick question. All right. Well, why don't we go ahead to breakout groups then? Joanna, will you please put up the list? So the way we're going to do this is Joanna has assigned each of you to a number. She's going to share it on the screen. She also just shared it in chat. So let me create these breakout rooms. Choose. There we go. Okay. You should now have the option to assign yourself to the breakout room using the number here on the screen. And we're going to have 10 minutes. We're going to come back at 7 minutes to the hour. If you have any problems, just let me know. I'll stay here in the main room.
Joanne, I guess I can join in any one of the rooms and kind of listen in.
Yeah, we've got an even number of people, so I put you in room 6, Chris, but feel free to.
Well, that's fine. I can go into 6. I just checking.
Thanks. And everyone able to find your names? I know it's